great pleasure to introduce Jim Saunders. I have kind of some formal comments and then a little informal. Jim received his BA in psychology from Ohio Wesleyan way back in 1963, the last century. An MA in experimental psychology from Conn College, and a PhD from Princeton in '68. He ultimately went to the Department of Otolaryngology and Human Communication. It always takes him so long to answer the phone there that I've forgotten what I was calling them for. You know, they used to just say ENT, but they don't anymore. Anyway, he joined there as an assistant professor in '73, much to our advantage. He currently holds the title of Professor of Research Otolaryngology, Physiology, and Neuroscience. Served on multiple editorial boards and has written lots and lots of papers. I'll truncate here. In 1998, he was chair-elect of the Medical School Faculty Senate, and for 3 years, he directed a project which I believe was your brainchild, which was called Faculty 2000, where they looked at things having to do with the polity of the standing faculty, the associated faculty, special situations, and then one of the groups was called the senior faculty. And so he asked Howard and me to co-chair that, and we asked him, well, what do you mean by senior faculty? And he said, whatever you want it to mean. So 55 and above is what we decided on. And actually, that's why this meeting is being held here today, because one of the children of our group, the senior faculty group, was to say, gee, we ought to have an association of faculty, senior faculty. And Jim said, go for it. And so the rest is history. But if it hadn't been for Jim, you guys would be eating alone and not talking about why you can't hear me right now. So, with no, Jim is terrific. We work together lots on things both faculty-oriented and science-oriented, and it's a great pleasure to introduce it.
Thank you, Rob. So I'm wired up here for this microphone and for a recording microphone. I think we're okay. Is that all right? All right. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here today and talk to you about hearing. And what'd you say? Everyone in this room has a hearing loss, like it or not. And it's a normal process of aging. It's not because you have bugs in your ears, though that's possible. The very first time back in the 70s that I went into the clinic with one of our otologists, just to get a feel of what real world people suffer, the patient comes up and says, Doc, Jesus, is buzzing in my head. And all of us smiled and said, okay, he's got a case of tinnitus. And the doc looks down and he reaches over a pair of tweezers and he takes out a gnat, which had got itself stuck in the earwax on the eardrum and was flapping its wings. And the patient really thought he was ready for psychiatric care rather than otolaryngologic care. But the bug was taken out and he was okay. I guess I moved this here. It's me. Well, we want to talk about the parameters of hearing and hearing loss, some of the biologic mechanisms that are associated with it, current available technology by which hearing loss can be ameliorated, and a new set of findings that are absolutely incredible, and that is this extremely severe impact hearing loss has on the elderly and why you need to pay serious attention to this. We need to look very briefly at the organization of the peripheral ear. That's the region out here. And it consists of 3 parts. The external ear, consisting of the pinna and the ear canal. These are simply devices that collect sound and then funnel it down the ear canal to the middle ear system. The middle ear consists of the eardrum, or technically what's called the tympanic membrane, and the three smallest bones of the body, the anvil, the hammer, and the stirrup, for what is familiar with all of us, certainly a more technical name. And the middle ear system consists of a whole set of pathologies that we'll talk about. And the pathologies in this part of the ear are totally and completely reversible. Whatever hearing loss is introduced by them can be reversed. Then we move on into the inner ear and this extremely complex structure. I always love taking it out. It doesn't come out that easily in the normal case. But this is a device called the cochlea. It has a snail-shaped region in its lower part and this series of complex tubes at the upper part. The upper part deals with our sense of balance and position in space. The lower part, the spiraling snail shell called the cochlea, deals with our sense of hearing. Both these sensory receptors are connected to a nerve fiber and a nerve trunk, and that trunk transmits information in the form of nerve pulses into the central nervous system. Look, put it simply put, if you bugger up this guy, you ain't got no nerve signals, the brain can't interpret sound. You suffer a hearing loss. Bugger up this part, and you don't walk right. Your balance isn't good. You get up in the middle of the night to take a pee, and without the orientation of the room, you suddenly find yourself shifting back and forth. Dizziness and falling arises from problems in this area, a very serious issue. If there is damage to this structure, you've had the ding-a-ling. We have no capability of repairing it at this point, though I'll come back to that. Okay, outer ear, middle ear, and inner ear. You think you have a hearing loss and you decide to have it assessed. And you make arrangements to go have that assessment. The assessment most typically takes place in an office of an audiologist. You can, if you want today, go online and Google hearing loss tests, and there are online tests in which you can assess yourself. Now there's a problem with that. If you've got earbuds, and iPad earbuds, believe me, are highly precisely manufactured devices whose sound level is highly known. And if you're using earbuds in an online testing system, the sound level stimulating your ear is pretty darn accurate. But if you're using one of the online systems with the speakers coming out of the laptop, that's bugger all useless, because if your head's back here, the sound is going to be lower than if you got your head right down here. And obviously, the closer you are to the sound source, the louder will be the sound in the ears, and the hearing test will be messed up accordingly. But you can get a rough idea of your hearing capability from these online tests. And it's not a bad idea to go ahead and try one of them. If it comes back that you are more than 40 decibels hearing loss, then you would be concerned about that. But the trigger is, regardless of whether it's the social events in your life or you take this online test, a proper evaluation is absolutely necessary. And I'm totally biased because the evaluation in a medical center is always better than going out to King of Prussia Miracle Ear. And why is that? Miracle Ear's got a conflict of interest. They want to sell you a hearing aid. Our audiologists here at HUP are full-time paid employees, and they don't get a kickback for every hearing aid they sell. So you can get the sense that there is a difference there. But some kind of academic medical center should be the choice for getting your hearing tested. Now, that's not to be entirely fair. An outfit like Mainline Audiologists along Montgomery Avenue is a highly reputable operation. And word of mouth from friends is really valuable in this regard. At any rate, if you go to the audiologist, they will perform what's called an audiogram, and is a test to determine the lowest sensitivity of your hearing. you'll have speech recognition tests where a variety of special words are said to you at different levels. And, you know, somebody will say onomatopoeia, and you say back, Adagugabuja. Aha, well, that's not too good. So speech reception tests, and then there are a whole host of other things. The hearing test for determining threshold sensitivity is called the audibility curve. And this is the standard call curve for an individual with normal adult hearing. We don't have to worry about what this means because this is measured in a complex way. Sound is represented as decibels because the actual physical measure of pressure in a sound, determined by pascals, means that this 0 point represents 20 micropascals. Don't worry about it. It just means that 0 does not mean there's no sound. It just means the sound is at the pressure of the reference point. And why do we shift from pascals to decibels? Well, here's the reason why. Each 20 decibel step is a factor of 10. So the number of pascals are 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million times bigger than the pressure at 0. So to make a graph with the numbers tractable, that we can make sense out of it, we convert it into this logarithmic scale called decibels. All right, a lower decibel reading means that the sound pressure level that will allow the patient to raise their hand and say, yeah, I hear the sound, is lower at this point than it is at this point. The extreme low and the extreme high frequencies require more sound to produce hearing. We hear best at about 3,600 hertz. You know, that's really neat because that's the crying frequency of the human baby. And there is indeed evolutionary pressure to have that best hearing point evolve because it changes with different species depending on the vocalizations of the species young. Okay, the next critical point is that we could take that curve and arbitrarily call each threshold point 0. And then a threshold measured that's different from that 0 point would represent a hearing loss. So for example, if I zeroed 3.5 kilohertz, and then I came back and tested a patient and they were plus 25 decibels above that, that would constitute a 25 decibel hearing loss. Sound pressure in normal hearing people can be increased across this entire range, and indeed there is a threshold by which we hear pain. That's a very dangerous threshold because 5 minutes of that will cause deafness. So it's given in a pulse, boom, and you actually feel it in your ear, and the reason is the tympanic membrane, the eardrum, moves back and forth such an excursion that it activates pain receptors in that membrane, and we feel it as a sensation. You've never done this, and you should not, but you've taken a pen tip because you want to get the wax out of your ears. Bad news, because you can poke through the tympanic membrane. But if you just momentarily brush against the tympanic membrane, you produce a motion that is far beyond anything that sound produces, and you go, ow! And that's because you've triggered those pain receptors. Do not pick your ears with pen tips. Okay, we can divide hearing loss into several categories. Now, you could have a decibel shift from that normal hearing curve all the way up to 25 decibels, and that range is still considered normal hearing. All right, what am I saying, guys? You could take another curve, 25 decibels above this curve, and statistically that would still be in the range of normal hearing. Then we go to situations in which it's considered to be a hearing loss. If that curve shifted by 25 to 40 decibels, that would be a mild hearing loss. What does that mean for a person in terms of actual functional capability? Not a lot. Occasionally, the person might say, what'd you say? might cup his ear, might lean in a little bit in social situations, in a noisy restaurant. Could you repeat that again? But not frequently. We come down to moderate hearing loss between 40 and 70 decibels. All right, you got to realize now, that's 40 decibels above this point, so that curve is running along this line approximately. Things are far more difficult. Cup the ear more often. What'd you say? And it occurs in quiet environments also. Elaine will turn to me and say, put on channel 27. What'd you say, dear? That's because I was looking at TV, not because I had a hearing loss. No, the whole enterprise interacts together. Then we come to severe hearing loss between 70 and 90 decibels, and this is clearly a debilitative state. The individual is having great problems communicating. Hearing and listening is missed. He goes to the movie theater, listens to the show, gets half the dialogue. In a noisy restaurant, they're lost. All right? In the state of Pennsylvania, if you have a hearing loss greater than 90 decibels, you are considered deaf. Now here's the reference point. If I got up alongside Rob's ear, just like this, 6 inches away, and I shouted like hell, "Rob, do you hear me?" The loudest human sound I can generate is 82 decibels. This individual with a 90 dB hearing loss might do okay if he's standing next to the fire station siren when it goes off at 120 dB, but he will never hear conversation. And that's why, even though there is some smidge of residual hearing, functionally it's defined as being deaf. We have two types of hearing loss. One is conductive. This is a blockage of sound in the conducting path. So the blockage occurs from out here in space where the sound is generated to the fluids of the cochlea of the inner ear. Now, I could have a wall imposed between me and the sound source, and that would produce officially a conductive hearing loss. But there's nothing biologically wrong with me. On the other hand, if something has blocked the progression, the conduction of sound to the cochlea, it falls under this rubric. Absolutely astounding. There's 120 million cases of conductive hearing loss a year. Every time, every one of you catches a cold, and you fill the middle ear cavity with fluid. And how do you know that? So everyone in this room swallow. You hear your ears crack? When you got a cold and you got infusion of fluid into the middle ear space and you swallow, there's no cracking. All right, so you know that right away. So 120 million people, mostly from colds or something that fills the middle ear with fluid, will have a conductive hearing loss. And that hearing loss is on the neighbor of 20 to 35, 40 decibels. So it's in that normal hearing range and in the range of mild hearing loss. The important thing, as we'll see in a second, it's treatable and reversible. Sensory neural hearing loss is the far more troublesome one. It is damage to the inner ear or the pathways of the nervous system related to processing sound signals. It can be temporary or permanent. We have classic cases in the clinic where I say this facetiously, but a little old lady comes in and says, "I can't hear anymore." And well, what's the problem? You take a history, the physician takes the history, and she's been popping aspirin like mad for arthritic condition. Salicylic acid has a really bad influence on the inner ear. Yet, if she stops the aspirin, the hearing loss will return. So there are rare circumstances where sensory neural hearing loss can be reversed. But when that sensory neural loss is permanent, it is irreversible. So every time you guys go to a rock concert, and I know half of you go regularly because I see you there, and you come out and you're banging your head, boy, I can still hear the music in there because you're having a case of tinnitus. The likelihood, the probability is 50-50 that you've lost some hair cells. These are the elements of hearing in the inner ear. And once those guys are lost, they'll never be repaired or replaced. You go to the next rock concert and you lose another 20 of them. The situation is insidious. The more loud noise you expose yourself to, the more hair cell loss occurs. Okay, for years I got my Homelite chainsaw, my old 14-inch Wonder, and I'm standing next to the garage in the backyard, and there's a wall here. I got my horses out here, and the branches I'm chopping up are right there. Okay, now the sound is bouncing off the wall to my ear and propagating directly to my ear. A Homelite chainsaw will generate 118 decibel sound, and that is a dangerous sound. Now, fortunately, I don't have that many branches falling, but if I decided to do a project in the basement and I got my Craftsman Super Duper Ace power saw, I always wear earbuds because that thing generates 125 decibels, and if I got a long cut, that's really dangerous. So the point is, once, for example, loud sound damages those hair cells, they're gone forever. All right, we talked about the types of hearing loss. Conductive is a dysfunction in the propagation of sound from its source to the fluids of the cochlea. Here's the absolutely classic one that everyone in this room suffers from to different degrees, and that's earwax in the canal. And actually, it's a problem that increases as we age. The ear canal, if you look at it here, has a skin lining to it. It is a continuum of the skin here at the pinna, and skin, of course, has cells that slough off. And in the course of time, the ear canal could actually fill up with dead skin cells. But old evolution came along and said, we got to get rid of that, and they figured out something. So along the lining of the skin wall are cells that secrete a material called cerumen, earwax to all of us. And in that lining, there are also hairs in the wall, and those hairs actually beat, and they beat in the direction of outward. So cerumen is carried constantly, and I use myself. I can wake up in the morning and there's a piece of yellow yunk on the pillow, and you squeeze it and it's waxy like, and that's cerumen that has been transported out and flopped onto the pillow. Okay. At our age, cerumen is secreted at the normal rate. Oh, by the way, the cerumen picks up the dead skin cells. So that's the mechanism keeping the ear canal clean. But the cerumen will pick up, the cerumen can accumulate, and as we age, the beating process of the hairs reduces, and cerumen can accumulate. My mother's 86, and I go down there. She says she can't hear a thing. She puts a hearing aid, can't hear a thing. And I look down her ear hole, and there's this black ring, visualized as I look into her ear hole. And she had a cerumen plug that was at least 3/4 of an inch long. It's an astounding thing. The doc will go in there with his pneumatic drill. He actually picks away at it. It's a little uncomfortable, but it's quick. And all of a sudden, there's an instant when the first piece is taken out and the tympanic membrane is re-exposed to sound. It's like, wow, there's suddenly an epiphany. There's a 40 dB increase or elimination of hearing loss. And it's, otolaryngologists love taking out earwax because it's, the patient goes, oh, this is fantastic. Can I contribute something? All right, so we can ourselves eliminate earwax. Gosh, the senior moment, Debrox? Is that the name of it? Yeah. It's a fluid that you tilt your ear to one side and you put it in and let it run down. And then you sit there for like 20 minutes and you take a shower and you use a squeegee bulb and you squeegee water in and out. And it works really well. If the cerumen is too impacted, you really need to see an otolaryngologist to get it out. How do you know it? Well, there's a sense of fullness in the ear. And it's not bad. You get your wife to look down your ear hole. You got to pull it up a bit so it makes a straight line target. And she says, oh yeah, I see some gunk down the bottom there. And that's when you either get the Deborahs or visit an otolaryngologist. There are middle ear problems. There can be holes in the tympanic membrane. How in the world to get a hole in the tympanic membrane? Well, you've been picking at the earwax with that pen tip, or you were in some situation where there was a sudden deceleration or acceleration, and the bones behind it act like a knife and cut through the tympanic membrane. In children, there's a procedure where we actually put a hole in the tympanic membrane for a clinical purpose. The tympanic membrane is very richly vasculated, and it heals remarkably quickly. Some perforation of the tympanic membrane is probably completely healed within 24 hours. It will yield a little bit of scar tissue, but that doesn't matter. It works pretty well after that. The ossicles, the three little bones, can become disarticulated. Again, sudden deceleration or acceleration, the bones separate. They have fantastic biological glues now, and the surgeon can go in there and drop a little, it's glue that comes from the abalone shell. I mean, it's now a derivative of it. Yeah, you can eat the abalone and you get the glue, but the glue works in a wet environment, right? That's its feature. And you need that because this is all soaking wet in here, inside the middle ear cavity. In fact, it's one of the best incubating mediums of the body. And you get a little bacteria in there and whoosh, you got a middle ear infection. Technical term is otitis media. So we can break the bones, we can disarticulate them, or we can produce an infection, otitis media, inside the middle ear cavity. But all these are medically, surgically treatable and completely reversible, and they are precisely diagnosed. How do we do that? Well, I thought I brought my, oh, I did, okay. If I could measure hearing under two conditions, one from a loudspeaker out here in space, and another by vibrating the bone, then if I vibrate the bone, I bypass the middle ear conductive system and simply jiggle the cochlea itself. If I have sound out here in space, I have to go through the middle ear system. I can calibrate the vibration of the skull, and this is a little device called a bone vibrator, and it's attached back here. It's part of a standard audiometric battery, and it'll jiggle the head at 500 hertz or 1,000 hertz, but it bypasses the middle ear system and stimulates the bone of the cochlea directly. And then I compare that against the hearing thresholds taken out here in space by sound that propagates through the normal conductive system. A difference between the two is referred to as the air-bone gap. And if one has an air-bone gap, so for example, here's the left and right ear, and an audiogram was performed, normal hearing down here in the low frequencies. This is pitch, low pitch to high pitch, and you can see that as the frequency, the pitch increases, we go to a mild to a severe hearing loss. But when the bone conducted thresholds are measured, they're here. The difference between these two indicate that something is blocking the conductive pathway. Cerumen, holes in the eardrum, disarticulation of the ossicles, the middle ear cavity is filled with fluid, on and on and on. There are even cholesteatomas or growths that can occur within the middle ear cavity. But this diagnosis is incredibly definitive because it distinguishes between the hearing when you vibrate, when you send the signals directly to the cochlea, and when they come through the normal pathway, through the airborne pathway. So you go to your audiologist, they're going to do an air-bone test. You now know what this means. All right, sensory neural hearing loss that originates within the cochlea. The types of damage can occur to the inner ear or to the central pathway. Now we'll see what these things are in a second, but it could be hair cell loss, the auditory nerve, that structure from the cochlea to the structures of the brain could show damage. Central nervous system damage could occur from strokes or just from normal atrophy of aging. And again, it may be temporary or permanent. And as I said before, if the sensory neural damage is permanent, it results in incurable hearing loss. And that hearing loss can be increased by increasing exposures to the traumatic events, whatever they may be, that produced the damage in the first place. The numbers here are absolutely staggering. 48 million Americans suffer measurable sensory hearing loss. You know, that's 20% of our population have a hearing loss. I haven't defined it by age yet, but it cuts across all ages. You know, you see a kid walking downtown and he's got his boom box right here and it's going like mad. I refer to as an otolaryngologist delight. Okay, because you can rest assured he's whacking away his hair cells. Kids go to concerts, they go to clubs. Who sat at a wedding recently and absolutely hated it because you couldn't hear anybody talking at the table? So my theory on that is the bride and groom are convinced that the louder the music at the wedding, the longer the probability that their marriage would last. There is no other explanation. 2.2 million people are completely deaf. There is a huge catastrophic change in society going on in how the totally deaf are dealt with. Relatively few now are being sent to schools for the deaf, where signing and oral traditions occur. The vast majority of them are getting cochlear implants, and that's having a profound effect. In fact, folks, in 50 years from now, there will be no sign language. And for those few in Appalachia that don't realize that, it's going to be horrible because there will be no training service available for sign language. This has produced enormous stress between the signing community and the community whose belief is that hearing loss is a problem. Hearing loss doesn't represent a culture, it represents a defect in the biology of the system that can now be reversed. Okay, 1 in 1,000 babies are born with severe hearing loss. And we have a wonderful system now throughout the United States so that every baby goes through newborn baby hearing screening. And we're picking up about 85 to 90% of the cases in babies where there's hearing loss. And of course, like all diseases, the earlier you can catch it, the better you can remunerate it. And in fact, cochlear implants are being put into deaf babies as early as 10 to 12 months. And by 3 years of age, those kids are at grade, speaking normally, and listening normally. It is a profound consequence of the cochlear implant. 14 million of us suffer from tinnitus. So right now I can hear the tinnitus here, and it happened in '77. I'm in the acoustic booth. My head's tilted like this, adjusting something. There's a huge 15-inch woofer above my head. Woofer is a speaker. And the graduate student goes, he throws the switch. And I got a blast of 140 decibels. It only lasted a little while because when I reflexed up, I tore the cone of that $450 speaker. But that's all it took. That's all it took, was about 1.5 seconds at that intensity. And I'll have tinnitus here the rest of my life. Tinnitus can be terribly, terribly debilitating if you have the emotional type of tinnitus. Oh my God, I can't turn it off. I got this constant sound in my head. It's driving me nuts. And you'll go up to the 14th floor and jump off. In my case, it's like the psychotic that says, I hear voices in my head, but I don't listen to them. I hear the tinnitus, but it doesn't emotionally bother me. But we have these two distinctions in tinnitus. Okay.
What happened to the grad student?
I got his PhD, and that's how I get rid of him. 1 in 3 Americans over 65 have a hearing loss, and the term is presbycusis. And all of you, when you go get your hearing tested eventually, you'll hear this term, presbycusis. And it is a term that refers to hearing loss with aging. of unknown origin. So generally speaking, presbycotic hearing loss is the result of the genetics that we personally bear and how it leads to the deterioration of our inner ear. Look, it gets worse. 2 out of 3 people, 33% have a hearing loss, or 66% by the time we get to age 75. 38 million Americans have a hearing loss in both ears. If I'm a construction worker and somebody drops the beam by mistake, it's my 2 ears that get the loud sound. If I'm a cancer patient and I'm receiving cisplatin and they haven't got the drug dose quite right, cisplatin is terrible with regard to the inner ear structures. Geez, what a conundrum. Do I cure the cancer or do I save my hearing? Okay, that's a rough one. But we now know how to titrate cisplatin, and in the proper doses, it can avoid hearing loss. Gentamicin, a major antibiotic, in extreme doses will cause hearing loss very severely. What are the consequences of hearing loss? Well, we lose hearing sensitivity. Sounds become heard as softer, and hence they're harder to understand. There's a loss of dynamic range. We don't hear loud sounds in the smooth gradient by which they normally increase. We'll see what that means in a moment. Time resolution starts to break down. There's a loss of frequency resolution. In fact, if I take out a big piece of the cochlea of its hair cells, suddenly all sounds will begin to sound alike because I can't distinguish between different pitches. And finally, there's sound distortion. Yeah, I heard it, Doc, but I don't understand it. You heard the speech reception test word, you heard something, but you didn't understand it. Just like the visual exam. You can see the letters up there, but you can't distinguish them. You know there's letters up there because it's a visual exam, but you reach a point where you can't distinguish one from the other. You hear the sound, but you can't distinguish it. What are the sources of this problem? Bacteria and viral and vascular damage can occur. Well, I won't get into them. There are genetic origins, and these are all specialized things. Ototoxic drug exposure can cause hearing loss, and the single one that gets most everyone is overstimulation, exposure to intense sound. When I'm talking about cutting pieces of wood in my backyard, that's a recreational hearing loss. You go off to the club and the wedding, and you lose some hair cells. That's recreational. But there's a whole other side of it, and that's occupational. Fortunately, on the occupational side, noise-induced hearing loss has been reduced greatly in the last 40, 50 years because of OSHA regulations and EPA regulations of noise exposure in the workplace. You're getting on the plane, and the guy that's got those batons ordering the plane out is wearing earmuffs. He's not wearing them because he's trying to protect his hearing. He's wearing them because the union has said you have to wear earmuffs. Because if you get a hearing aid loss and you claim it's due to the noise of the jet plane, you can't sue, we can't bring an action because the agreement we signed as the union guaranteed that you as that employee at that job was wearing hearing aids, hearing protector. And this occurs all over in the industry. Anything that's a heavy industry now wears hearing protectors. And it's a cover your backside kind of situation, but it also protects the hearing of the individual in that noisy environment. If we diagnose sensory hearing loss, again, we do a hearing test. We measure thresholds against a 0 value, which is the normal hearing curve. By the way, that 0 value is adjusted for different ages. So look, this patient would hear normally in the low frequencies. Guys, that's fantastic, because most of the speech signals lie in the low frequencies. There are fricatives, s, sh, k, in the high frequencies, but we can understand the vowels pretty good as long as we have good low frequency hearing. And in fact, he goes out pretty well to 2,000 hertz, and this is generally within the range of normal hearing. But then it drops off precipitously. And between his left and his right ear, he progresses through mild to severe to profound hearing, a 90 decibel loss out here at 8 kilohertz. When they do the air-bone gap test by vibrating the skull, you notice the dotted line shows the same hearing loss as the airborne test. So there is no conductive component here. The hearing loss resides within the cochlea or within the nerves of the auditory pathway. What are the consequences of this? I said before, this individual might hear pretty good in in talking environments, as long as the signal to noise ratio is good and he's facing the individual at a reasonable distance. But again, not all of speech resides in 500 to 1,000 hertz. Sally sells seashells, is the fricative, and that's up about 5 kilohertz. So he's going to hear Ally, al, e, al, okay, the S's are attenuated or gone. Vivaldi is gone, forget it. You know, the high frequency violin concertos, that's over. The hearing loss between 6 and 8 kilohertz is severe to profound, and the violin sounds run around 8,000 to 12 kilohertz in their harmonics. That's terrible. And I have more people come up to me and say, I got to go to the orchestra, I can't appreciate it. I got this good hearing aid, I paid a small fortune for it. Well, yeah, but the baseline is gone in those high frequencies. All right, here's presbycusis curves for hearing loss. Again, guys, 0 represents normal hearing, and these numbers represent hearing loss. And these are normative data taken from individuals that have reported no history of drug exposure, gentamicin or cisplatin. There's no genetic indication of a hearing loss, and they can't report that they ever exposed themselves to loud sounds. Where the heck do you find people like that? Well, you found them in a tribe in Central Africa. And these are very famous data from individuals that have, quote unquote, not yet been subjected to the societal influence of hearing loss. So this would be hearing loss from the pure genetic component. So for all of us in this room, add all the rest of that gobbledygook on it. Exposure to sound, who knows, cisplatin, gentamicin, and whatever little genetic component we got going for us. Look, here at 60 years of age, you can see that individual is down 70 decibels at 8 kilohertz. And this is what I just described a moment ago. But the good part of the story is even out to 90 years of age, out to 1 kilohertz, maybe 1,500 hertz, hearing's pretty good. So you can actually have centenarians who hear in conversation really well because it's the low frequencies that are preserved. Whether evolution was doing us a favor or not, I don't know. But I'd rather hear speech if I got to give away my Vivaldi, all right? Because speech keeps me connected with my fellow persons. All right, so most of us in the room are falling in between here someplace. And again, these are normative data, and I would posit that almost everyone in this room is going to fall between the 60 and 90-year-old curves. Yes, some of our genetics will vary, and some will be a little better, some a little bit worse, but that's the kind of curve everyone here has. Okay. If I had a normal hearing person and I had earphones in the left and right ear, and I gave a tone in the left ear that was 20 decibels, and they had a knob that they controlled the loudness in the right ear, and I said, okay, here's your test tone, beep. Now adjust the loudness here to the same level, beep. They would follow a linear pattern perfectly. So for every 20 decibels in the test ear. In the standard ear, the test ear would yield the same amount of level. Now I have an individual who, for argument's sake, has an impairment in the left ear. So I give that ear a 20 dB sound. By the way, the impairment is 50 decibel hearing loss. So I give a 20 dB sound in the left ear, and he can't hear it, right? So there's no adjustment in the right ear. I give a 40 dB sound, can't hear it, no adjustment. 50, then I give a 60 dB sound, oh yeah, I hear something, and he adjusts it, but he only adjusts it to 30 decibels, okay, because there's still a hearing loss. And finally, the adjustment comes back to the normal curve. Let me translate this. The doctor says to the patient, do you hear me now? What'd you say, doc? Do you hear me now? Oh, doc, did you say something? Do you hear me now? Huh? What? You talking to me? Do you hear me now? What are you shouting for? Because they go from not being able to hear to recruiting, suddenly rising up to the normal level of hearing in just a few decibels. And so you go from I can't hear, what are you shouting for? And it is dramatic. But if the sensory neural loss has this, it complicates the capacity to overcome it because the electronic design not only has to increase the amplification, but it's got to adjust for the compression of the sound so that it will try and approximate normal hearing capability. Modern electronics can do that. Okay, here's a guinea pig cochlea in which I've dissected away the shell, and along this surface are the sensory hair cells. Why pack it in a coil? Well, that's because it's long. It's 44 millimeters long, so it's about that long, but it's packed in a tiny coil. I should have started passing these around, but I'll do it now. And I want them back. Okay? This is a real human cochlea. These are, these are the middle ear ossicles. And this is another example of the size of the human cochlea. Now, if I looked down on this surface with scanning electron microscopy, I'd see the hair cells. And hair cells are so named because they're a cell that has little hairs on the top of it. And those hairs must be jiggled before the events can take place for hearing to occur. Jiggling the hairs causes the hair cell to depolarize. It releases neurotransmitter at its base, stimulates the auditory nerve fiber, pulses run up the auditory nerve fiber. Oh yeah, I hear it, is the result. Well, there's a long distance between those spikes running up the auditory nerve and I hear it. But essentially, if you ain't got those spikes going up the auditory nerve, you'll never raise your hand and say, I hear it. But those are what the hair cells like. It's an incredibly gorgeous looking epithelium. And if we blow up one hair cell, you can see all the hairs sitting on top of it. And again, those hairs have to jiggle back and forth when the application of sound pressure is applied to the ear. All right, that's a big long story, so we're going to skip that. Just accept the fact that sound causes those hairs to jiggle. If the hairs are destroyed, there ain't no jiggling. All right? Hairs are destroyed with loud sounds, by drugs, by genetic causes, et cetera, et cetera. I made my claim to fame because I engineered an underwater water jet that in a preparation of hair cells from chickens, well, they're cheap, and you can harvest the hair cells very quickly. An astounding thing in biology, a hair cell is a hair cell, whether you go from lizards to fish to humans. They all operate with the same principle. And the water jet would blow the hair back and forth. And here I've isolated one of these hair cells by itself, and I can do more gobbledygook with that. It's really fancy-dancy stuff. But now I'm going to blow that individual hair bundle back and forth. And in fact, here it is.
All right.
You got to get a sense of this. This is 3 microns. That's 3 millionths of a meter. The movement here is 1 micron, 1 millionth of a meter. A 1 millionth movement back and forth is like the loudest rock band you could find. So this thing is sensitive from movement at this level down to movement at the angstrom level. And that's 10,000 times smaller than what we're seeing here. Okay? An incredibly exquisite system. And again, with that kind of tiny movements, if I have an extremely loud sound and I start to jiggle that thing back and forth too hard, I'm going to get the same kind of physical stresses that will cause the airplane wing if it jiggles up and down to fall off. There'll be a change in the mechanical structure of that system. In fact, I can never find the tape, but we've got one situation where the hairs are running back and forth like this, and suddenly they splay out like that because the interconnecting bonds have broken down, and that is a classical occurrence in hearing loss. But anyway, this allowed me to study the nature of hair cells and how the hair bundles were mechanically damaged. So that's my own tooting of the horn. Okay, so we get in there and actually damage the organ of Corti, the cochlea, and you can see here that there's a few a few scattered outer hair cells remain, damage to the inner hair cell. Here the outer hair cell field has been pretty much stripped away, but the inner hair cells appear fairly intact. I tell you, you can have every combination in the book between how much damage and as it occurs and how many hair cells remain. The bottom line is lose 1 hair cell and whatever function it subserved is gone. Lose 2 hair cells and whatever function they subserved is gone. If you lost the 2 of them right together, you'd never know the difference. Well, what happens when I lose 10? You never know the difference. I could lose 10 scattered across the spiral. You'd never know the difference. I could lose 100 in the same patch, and now I'm starting to have a hearing loss in the frequencies coded by that patch. But there's lots of hair cells in that patch. If I denude that patch, all hearing for those frequencies is gone. So it's a graded process, going from mild to severe to profound to totally deaf. And the proportion of hair cells lost is in direct proportion to the amount of hearing loss. It's not only the hair cells. Here's the hair cells along the cochlea right here. But remember I said they're connected to nerve fibers that go into the brain. Here's a situation where nerve fibers have started to degenerate. Nerve deafness is a common term that the clinicians will talk to you about. And it represents the loss of the nerve fibers connecting whatever residual hair cells exist to the central nervous system. Obviously, if the water pipes connecting to the drain system upstairs break down, you ain't getting no water upstairs. And so hearing loss will be associated with this. Again, guys, lose hearing cells, lose nerve fibers, and that's it. There's no mechanism of repairing them available today. Okay, this simply talks about the central nervous system, so I won't get into it, but it's a complicated pathway, and stroke or damage could occur along that region, and it too will induce hearing loss. How do we know if we have a hearing problem? And this is a standard set of questions one might ask oneself. Am I continuously asking other people to repeat themselves? In a noisy room, is it difficult to pick out a conversation? So do you find yourself not wanting to go to dinners anymore at a restaurant with friends because you just can't understand what the hell they're talking about? And the noisier their environment, the worse the communication. Do you find yourself withdrawing from conversation? So I tell a little anecdote here. There was a time when I was a fraternity member, and the house mother was like 87 years old, and she'd come downstairs and we'd say to her, "Tickle your ass with a feather, Mom?" And she'd say, oh, particularly nice weather today. Okay. Well, that's okay if the communication is gross from the source to the hearing loss individual. But what if you're at a party and I say, Jean, particularly nice weather today. Boom, she slaps me in the face because she heard, tickle your ass with a feather today. All right? And the problem of communication is one of the more serious issues at hand. Inappropriate responses, well, that was the example I just gave. Others tell us we're not hearing well. You know, Elaine says, I think it's time you get down to the clinic. And she's making a critical observation that I have to respond to. Others tell us we're speaking loudly. That's absolutely classic. Uncle Harry at the holiday dinner is talking like this throughout the dinner, you know? And everyone says, Harry, you're talking too loud. What do you mean I'm talking too loud? That's because his self-feedback of what he hears is passing through a filter of hearing loss. And all of us have this amazing capacity to adjust the level of our voice to compensate for the noise in the environment we're speaking. And it's remarkable. And what Harry hears is a situation in which he feels he has to speak louder to overcome the resistance to communication. Television is turned up loudly, cupping the ear constantly, and just can't understand others. And there are enormous consequences of this. The wife says, Al, would you take out the garbage? Al sits there watching TV. Al, would you take out the garbage? Sits there watching TV. Hey, Al, come on, take the garbage out. Nothing. Ah, you damn SOB, and she takes it out herself. And the relationship in that little teeny-weensy situation has the wife thinking that she's being ignored by the husband, or the husband doesn't hear her. Multiply that times 10,000 times all situations, and the relationships, the partner that has a hearing loss can begin to deteriorate. And this is a well-known phenomena, and it is a serious consequence. We'll see more of that in a moment. Well, what can I do about it? Again, you're speaking to the choir here. You need to get you need to go to an otolaryngologist to rule out any medical complications. He can look down the old ear hole and he'll see right away if there's wax. There are certain tests that can reveal an acoustic neuroma around the auditory nerve that require skull-base surgery. And those are rare events. But you rule out all of that. And then you need a series of hearing tests and auditory evaluations. Again, I posit that you should go to an academic medical center to have this done. There are reputable places out in the field, but remember, there's a potential conflict of interest here. A hearing aid might be recommended, and you can purchase your hearing aid through the audiologist or a whole nother pathway called hearing aid dispensers. Prices are generally the same. The dispenser might be more convenient for your physical location. And since early hearing aid use sometimes requires revisits to the audiologist for adjustment and cleaning, a hearing aid dispenser that's more within the neighborhood might prove valuable. Again, this dispenser is working at a conflict of interest. They get a cut of the juice when they sell a hearing aid. A hearing aid contract today is bundled, meaning that you have to buy services that go with the hearing aid. I'm involved in a major movement at the moment to get this unbundled, because let's say you buy 6 return visits with your hearing aid, and you only needed 2. But when you bought into this thing, you had to pay for, 4 extra visits. You should pay for them on an individual basis, because it's like modern electronics. They don't often break down. The hearing aid is a pretty robust device, and with a little bit of smarts, you can clean it yourself perfectly easily. The major assistive listening device is a hearing aid. A hearing aid is nothing more than a pair of glasses reconfigured and stuck in your ear hole. Okay? This does nothing to improve the condition of a visual deficit. It is simply a way of refunneling and refocusing light energy back onto the receptive elements of the retina. A hearing aid does nothing to correct the biological basis of the hearing loss. All it does is amplify the signal to overcome the loss of hearing so that you can more efficiently stimulate whatever hair cells remain in the system. And that's all it does. And a hearing aid consists of 3 devices: a microphone, an amplifier, and what's called a receiver. The microphone might be on the hearing aid itself, or it may reside in a little device that sits on top of the ear. Some of them have it mounted in glasses. A whole huge array of options, but the fundamental structure remains the same. The hearing aid in the ear may have a mold around it so that it stops sound from getting into the ear hole, thus producing feedback and ringing. Maybe you've heard a person with a hearing aid and suddenly hear, and they reach up and they drop the volume control because they're getting feedback oscillation. It's like if I picked a speaker up and I brought it up to this microphone, it would suddenly produce self-oscillation. It's the same process. And now the more modern ones have a little tube that runs into the ear, and you can adjust the diameter of the tube to change the loudness of the sound being presented to the ear. That's all it is, nothing more complicated. Well, sort of. It depends on what electronics we put in there to do that. I simply have this curve because what I want to show is, here's a curve with hearing loss, and the amplification in your hearing aid would represent this reciprocal of that curve. So you'd only want 5 decibels gain out here at 250 hertz, but you'd want gain on the order of 60 dB out here at 8,000. The gain of the hearing aid compensates for the loss of the hearing capacity to restore the zero line, okay? In theory. All kinds of hearing aids, completely in the ear canal. The Miracle Aid is one of those that goes deep into the canal and you can't even see it. There's no cosmetic implication of that. There's one that's in the canal, but it's not set back that deeply. There's one that's in the ear, and it can be seen rather clearly. And then there's a larger unit that sits behind the ear and has a tube that connects into the ear canal itself. I won't go through all of these, but it's vanity versus functionality. The bigger the package of the hearing aid, the more doodads can be in it, because you can have more electronics associated with it. However, the more obvious it is. For the gals, it doesn't matter. You got long hair and it gets hidden. The vanity of the male is absolutely horrendous. And it stops the distribution of hearing aids cold. And it's absolutely crazy. Yet in our history, hearing loss, people that don't speak right from hearing loss, has a long, long association with mental illness. And the thing that sits in the ear canal that is seen by others is perceived to carry the concept that A, I'm flouting my disorder, or B, I'm probably a little nutsy on the side also. But the vanity thing is really, really serious as something that's retarding acceptability of hearing aids in elderly individuals. Smaller versus bigger. Smaller can't have as much circuitry and capability. Bigger can have more amplification, greater gain, and more functionality. I simply show these again because they do vary substantially in size, and these are approximately all to scale. These 3 guys would be inserted in the ear. This would be hidden completely in the canal. it's a little more visible. This would be seen as something sitting in the canal. And of course, these devices reside behind the ear pinna. Hearing aids come in two flavors, analog and digital. The cost difference is huge. A single hearing aid that's analog, and it consists of one broadband, it is slightly adjustable, and it's not easily customized to the particular hearing loss of that individual. Once an adjustment is made on it, it's set for good. A digital hearing aid costs a lot of money for a single one, and it adjusts a bank of filters. We'll see what that means in a moment, and it can be readjusted if the hearing loss continues to deteriorate. So here's an example of a bank of filters representing different regions of pitch. If I could adjust the gain on each one of those filters individually, then I could adjust them to compensate for the hearing loss curve by the amplification in the hearing aid. So obviously a digital hearing aid can be far more customly adjusted to your particular mode of hearing loss. But you pay for that. The other thing is the microphone that comes with the hearing aid. An omnidirectional microphone. Now, if it's in the ear, the microphone is detecting signals mostly perpendicular to the head. If I have a hearing aid that goes behind the ear, the microphone is in that little device and it's facing forward. Well, that's good because I can point that as an antenna. All right. Most modern hearing aids, analog and digital, have a switch which allows me to go omnidirectional, so I can pick up signals from all around me, or I can become directional. Now, directional is important because you're at a dinner, 6 people at the table. You learn quickly to keep your wits about you. You're watching people's lips. So Rob starts talking, and I look at him, and my hearing aid is focused on him, but the rest of the noise in the room has been proportionally reduced. And, you know, each individual talks, and I point accordingly. The omnidirectional is important because one of the grandkids is behind me and the other 3 are running out here, and suddenly, Poppy, look over here. And now I know somebody sent a signal in my direction, and so I scan the visual environment. There she is. Okay, so that switch between those two modes is important and useful. And all modern hearing aids have omnidirectional and directional capability. The modern digital ones also have a wireless connection. This is a fantastic change in the technology. It means that those individual filters can be adjusted on your home computer. So you don't need to go back to the audiologist anymore. You simply bring up the program, you're watching TV, and you know the general ambient noise in the room, and you adjust your filters to watch the TV to optimum condition. And you go click, and program 1 is saved. So that's saved under TV watching. And then you have a situation where some bunch of folks come over to the house, and you say, I just want to adjust this. You guys talk normally. And so you're adjusting the hearing aid to that particular noisy environment. You know, the app is now on the iPhone, so you go to the theater, to the movie or the theater or the orchestra, and you adjust the parameters of your filter for the most comfortable listening condition for you. Well, that's fantastic. That means you as individual are adjusting your listening conditions, and you don't need to run off to that expensive visit at the audiologist every time. And the audiologist isn't adjusting them in real world. She's adjusting them for the office conditions, whatever they might be. There's another device coming on the market right now. It's called the Ear Machine. It's an app for the iPhone. And if you have earbuds in the iPhone and the Ear Machine app, you've got your own $240 hearing aid. Now, if you're willing to carry it like this and have the wires like this, you just saved yourself bilaterally $7,000. Okay? And it is a powerful device with a precision manufactured microphone. And with the Ear Machine app, you have all this individual adjustment capabilities. So these are things coming on the market, and it is really shaking things up enormously because it is attempting to take away the monopolistic control over hearing aids from the manufacturer to the audiologist, to the physician, to the dispenser, to the repair and maintenance of the hearing aid. And all of this is a system that feeds upon itself, raising that expense to those incredible levels. And I tell you this, guys, there is no insurance policy and no Medicaid, Medicare that covers hearing aids, except for children under 12 years of age. So we don't qualify. There are other devices out there now, and I'll just refer to one, but you know, you can take your hearing aid and you go into a theater, and if the theater is looped for hearing capability, you throw a switch on the hearing aid, and they all have it now, and you're connected to the magnetic loop, which is connected to the screenplay of the movie and its audio. And so every other sound in the room is gone, and all you're connected to directly is the audio coming out of the movie. There's infrared in theaters and in the orchestral halls, and the infrared sends a beam out, and you can be given a pair of earphones. They're free in most theaters, and you can listen to the show through the infrared system, and the quality of listening is much, much greater than if it's from the microphone mounted here on your hearing aid. There's another thing called an FM system, and it's a handheld device. I see these all the time now. It radios through Bluetooth to the hearing aid, and the individual walks around the room, and so if Rob is talking to me, she'd hold it like, or he would hold it like this. And so the efficiency of his voice reaching the microphone is enormously improved, as opposed to it getting here, where there might be traffic noise or other people talking, and that has had a huge impact. And this looping system now is a little behind in the United States, but churches and synagogues, meeting halls, government meeting halls, and our local Montgomery County chapter of the Hearing Loss Association just had the Jeans Library up in Lafayette Hills looped. So everyone goes into the meeting and the speaker talks at the podium. I see everyone reach up and throw the switch. The rest of the world goes dead, and they are connected to the speaker at the podium through his microphone and the magnetically looped system that's in the room. I'll just briefly say there is this thing called a cochlear implant for individuals with severe to profound hearing loss. It is an astounding device that re-stimulates the surviving elements of the auditory nerve by passing an electrode into the cochlea and then connecting that electrode up to a processor that's external to the ear that goes through electronic massaging of the sounds, turns it into an electrical pulse train that passes down the electrode to stimulate the cochlea and hence stimulate those surviving nerve fibers. If the nerve fibers have atrophied too far, then the current passed down the electrode gets too high and stimulates the facial nerve. So that is one of the limiting factors. You wouldn't want to have somebody say, "Hello, DuPont." And my face goes like this while I'm listening to somebody say, "Hello, DuPont," because it's stimulating my facial nerve. But the cochlear implant has been a profoundly successful device. All right, I said we're coming to the end now. The consequence of hearing loss is a loss of communication, psychological and social isolation, quality of life deteriorates, and it's a danger in failing to detect distant stimulation. hard of hearing people step off the curb and are injured with much, much greater frequency than the general population because they don't hear the approaching vehicle or cyclist or whatever. What can be done? Well, we talked about hearing aids, other assisted listening devices. We naturally learn lip reading as we slowly lose our hearing. People have commented that when I talk to people, I look at their faces. And I'm not looking at their faces, I'm looking at their lips. I don't lip read, but I have enough self-learnt lip reading skills that I can fill in the gaps between words when Rob utters a sentence. Sally went to the seashore, and all I got was Sally went, oh, sure. And by reading lips and by cognitively connecting the structure of the sentence, I get meaning out of it. And that happens with all of us at this age. But here's the kicker. There's 2 recent studies. Compared to those with normal hearing, individuals with mild, moderate, or severe hearing loss had 2 to 5 times increased risk of developing dementia. The risk increased with the severity of hearing loss. Second study, results from the previous one were reinforced. Also, we learned that those with hearing loss had a 30 to 40% faster rate of thinking and memory abilities deteriorating compared to those with normal hearing. The bottom line here, guys, is if you have a hearing loss at this age and you choose to do nothing about it, the likelihood of suffering dementia and cognitive loss is significantly increased. By doing nothing about it, you are significantly more at risk. Well, the last line indicated that seniors with hearing loss were 24% more likely to develop mental decline. This is untreated hearing loss. The risk factors are associated with can't hear, don't pay attention, shut yourself off, lack stimulation, and it leads to dulling of the memory. The critical point is this. A hearing loss means that the individual will tend to socially isolate themselves. The isolation comes from all those reasons I said before. The embarrassment of not understanding what's going on in the room. The embarrassment in a one-to-one conversation of either not understanding or responding inappropriately. The inability to hear what your wife says, and the recognition that you're embarrassed by that, and yet you're still too embarrassed to say, what'd you say? Because after a while, that kind of wears a little thin. There's another thing called cognitive overload. With hearing loss, more brain function has to be devoted to trying to understand what's being said. A moment ago, I said I looked at Rob. His mouth is moving. I'm reading his lips. I'm getting a partial sentence, okay? And yet, there's a context in which he said, Sally sells seashells. So, his girlfriend Sally and he were down at the seashore last week, and Sally picked up a dozen seashells, and she went up to the boardwalk, and suddenly he says, Sally sells seashells. If I had that whole context in front of me, and I heard it properly, when I didn't get Sally sells seashells, there might be closure because of the partial words that I heard, his movement of the lips, and the context in which that was said. But man, did I devote a lot of brain power to resolving that issue. And cognitive overload wears out the system. And that can lead to cognitive dysfunction because I'm devoting too much to trying to understand the nature of the conversation. Does this mean that everyone who has a hearing loss is going to develop dementia? No. But are you at risk? Absolutely. More research is needed. And the major study going on at the moment is if individuals, senior elderly individuals, do have a hearing aid, do we reverse the incidence of occurrence of dementia and cognitive dysfunction? And the answer to that is not known. You all need to be knowledgeable about your own hearing. You have to understand the nature of hearing assisted devices, and you have to use them. Too often the patient comes home, sticks it in his ear, I really feels uncomfortable, and takes it out, puts it in the drawer. That ain't gonna help. It's got a learning curve to it, and you have to get used to how to use it. Don't give up. Follow-up checks, and use other assisted technology. And there's just a mountain of technology exploding in the marketplace. And again, be an advocate for yourself. Keep in touch. Practice the difficulty of learning to wear the hearing aid. Explore technology options and stay up to date. And these are two websites that are near and dear to me that will help if you need to get external help. Well, I hope that's been instructive. By the way, my hearing aid was given to me by my son this past Christmas, and it's called the Over the Hill hearing aid, and it didn't cost $3,600. It also doesn't work too well either. All right, guys, thank you.
If people have to run off, do so, but if there's any questions, I think Jim might even accept a few if you speak very loudly.
That was terrific. Did you say that when you treat the hearing loss as a danger of
We don't know that yet.
because you pointed out that you're dealing with genetic cause of the diseases, then there's also genetic cause.
These studies were undertaken on the elderly that did not have treated hearing loss. They were not wearing hearing-assisted devices. And compared to a group with more normal hearing, the incidence of cognitive dysfunction and dementia was greatly, greatly increased. Now, the issue is the $64 question, and the thing that's going to explode hearing aids in this country like mad is the observation that, yes, we can reduce those consequences with treated hearing loss. But we don't know that yet at this point.
I'm a speech language pathologist. I deal with people with hearing loss, certainly kids with cochlear implants. But I'm getting so many referrals now from people who say, well, I spent the $8,000 in my aid, which, I'm sorry, you can go to Costco and get them for $1,300. But go to the audiologist first. But trying to say, we need to teach you to hear. We need the oral rehab part of it. And that's sort of, you don't think they're going to pop it in and hear, and they're going to be 16 years old again. And
Yeah, that's a critical point. And in fact, I goofed, I missed that in the study. You just don't put these things in here normally. You don't turn on the cochlear implant and hear normally. There is a learning curve, and there are training processes out there to help in that learning process. Thank you.
Who does that training for?
So
You go?
go to an audiologist or a speech pathologist who does this kind of thing. And we very well speech reading, because it's so much more than just your lips. It's a whole thing, which is he's saying he's watching the whole table to be able to get what the lips of that one speaker is saying. So it's a big process, and it's a wonderful thing to do with a group of people, because we ideally to continue to socialize. You don't want to be a social isolate. To me, that's the terrifying. And I could say, because I make my trade by teaching people to talk, I am the proud wearer of the old lady aid, which I wish that I had started wearing my aid 10 years ago, and not 5 years ago. My life would have just been easier.
Jim, I recognize that I have a hearing problem, and my wife would do what would help me, but that's besides the point. I'm sitting in this room and I can hear you perfectly. And if I knew nothing else, I would say I need more help. Now, what are the properties of the way you're speaking or the acoustics of this room that make it so good for me to hear everything that you have said?
The noise level in the room is low. Indeed, the only noise is the fan coming out of this projector. So the ability of my speech signal to reach your ears without being masked or interfered with from external sources has a high probability of the bits of information transfer being good. And so whatever residual hearing you have can be maximally applied to that signal. If there were noise from other people talking in the room, your ear and brain is trying to sort out me from that, and communicability deteriorates. So if the TV's on and your wife says, take the garbage out, you don't hear it, it's because it's a combination of interfering effects from other sources. Now, your hearing loss could continue to exacerbate, and at some point you wouldn't hear me well. Or what you hear would be garble.
My dog loves the taste of earwax, so I've lost 3 digital hearing aids over the last 5 years, 2 with radiographs showing them hidden up in the stomach, so we know not to keep looking for them. So I'm curious about why it is that hearing aids specifically are not included as part of medical insurance as they are in the UK, for example.
Yep.
So you don't pay for hearing aids. Here you pay full price. What's the social political history of that?
My first quip is that maybe homeowners insurance would cover the dog eating your hearing aids. Yeah.
Locked up in
I have to admit that I don't fully understand the history behind this, but it's economics. So these guys, if you get all bells and whistles and bifocals and shaded lenses and everything, so with the frames, I got these last summer, $620, okay? As opposed to a hearing aid, new digital hearing aid, $3,500, $2,500. Okay, you could go to Costco and you get it maybe for $15. That's a big price difference. And we got 42 million people out there that could benefit from a hearing aid. And the powers that be have decided that the societal expense or the business expense of that is too great. In the UK, where I think you people are a little more civilized when it comes to healthcare, that hasn't played in the same way. It's a terrible situation. I was down lobbying in Congress back in the spring just to introduce a $500 tax refund credit for a hearing aid purchase. And none of the Republicans on the Hill would even talk about it. I mean, it was something to do with taxation. So that was that. So our climate now is not favorable to some sort of support. What I've been doing in the Hearing Loss Association of America is struggling to bring price down, to try and bring new technology to the forefront that would add competitiveness to the existing hearing aid industrial complex of hearing distribution. And that may well happen in the next 10 years. But for right now, it's prohibitive. My son, the computer scientist, tells me that he could get a computer printing machine, and he could put full circuitry with a digital board in it and the plastic covering for the hearing aid, print them out for $150 a piece. Okay? So I'm thinking maybe he should get off his day job and start doing this. But the price increase comes from the manufacturer to the audiologist, to the otolaryngologist, to the distributor, and cost is added all the way through this tree to those devices. And there is no alternative. Now we have Costco coming into the scene, and we have, I didn't talk about other things called personal sound amplification products, because they're very controversial at the moment. But there is new technology coming out there. Right now we have to suffer.
A person, well, my wife, at the age of 75, she got overnight sensory neural hearing loss. Can that be partly with some tension? Could it be physical? And how does it recover? Sometimes it recovers, sometimes it does not. Right?
So, an individual at age 75 woke up the next morning deaf in one ear. Clinically, it's called sudden hearing loss.
Right.
It could be due to some viral invasion that finally took out the receptive structures. It may or may not come back. It could come back partially. Nobody understands what the causal relationship is. What did this? It could be a vascular damage. Some blood vessel blew out, connected with the ear, and suddenly there was vascular insufficiency and the ear went dead. It's a terrible situation.
Psychologically, sometimes if you're tense, you're more likely, it may trigger it. Can it?
I've never heard that, but it could be.
And one more question is, would oxygen chamber treatment help it?
I don't know. I should be seen by an otolaryngologist. If you need help getting an appointment here at HUB, I can help with that. If she wants to be seen again.
Right.
There's another question.
Is tinnitus a noise that also interferes with your hearing?
Yes.
And also, if you have all these hearing aids that have been purchased and they don't work, is there a place where you can give them?
Can you what?
Well, where you can donate old eyeglasses.
Yeah, the Hearing Loss Association of America accepts used hearing aids, and they're all recyclable. In fact, the digital ones are really recyclable.
I'm reminded when you talked about loud noises, Dorothy Sayers wrote a classic book, The Nine Tailors, where the guy is up in the church tower and he dies because of the clanging of the church bells. Can you tell us how that would work?
I don't know of any human ever died from loud sound exposure. However, if you're in World War I and a 210 millimeter shell went off 100 feet from you, it would produce a loud bang, but that's not what might kill you. If you're next to a lightning strike, it's a loud sound, but it's probably a secondary effect that kills you. However, there's a thing called an audiogenic mouse, which has a predisposition, a genetic predisposition to loud sound. And when it is exposed to loud sound, it runs in an absolutely uncontrollable manner, flops over dead. But in humans, I don't know of any case where loud sound kills. Kills secondarily. Bang!
Well, this guy was in the church tower while they were doing the New
No, it makes a great scenario.
That's right.
It's a great story.
One more.
I just want, Jim, I'm Tom Calvin. You helped us. We got appointments with hearing test next week. I didn't take long. But I just want to tell you, I had tinnitus for a couple of decades. I've had one audiologist after another tell me it has no impact on me. It just blows me away to hear it. Now, when you say indeed, it has a very direct.
And we're talking about the hearing loss.
Right.
Yeah.
The audiologist has been telling me that tinnitus is not a problem.
Depends on the magnitude.
Not for them.
We'll find out.
I mean, your cognitive system sounds pretty good to me. It's as the hearing loss gets worse and the failure to communicate. I mean, I was making the example, some of us unconsciously really learn to be good lip readers. I mean, remarkably good. And we don't know it. But I can always tell, somebody's looking at my lips when I'm talking. And I know it's a combination, hearing loss and lip reading, body context, and body gesturing, and it all adds to the communicability. And so you've learned to communicate well. But the hearing loss will continue to deteriorate, and at some point it could become a problem. Okay, I can talk with folks afterwards.
Jimmy, I ought to let him have his lunch before supper.